Hello and welcome to the Call for Help show. I'm attorney Paul Rebein. Also here in the studio with me today are Pastor Brenda Fruster and Robin Lockett, my co-hosts. Today we're going to talk about housing in the Tampa Bay area. As we've discussed previously, rental rates have increased at an unprecedented rate recently due to a variety of factors, including a lot of people coming from other places, uh, moving to Florida in the hopes of getting a cheaper rent than what they have perhaps in the Northeast or on the West Coast. Well, that's kind of driven people out of the market. There's been some stories recently that rates have increased over 20% in the last year, and that is driving low-income people out of the market. In addition, there's just not enough affordable housing in our area or government assistance. There's wait lists for Section 8 and that sort of thing. We're going to start off today with a pre-recorded interview I did with an expert in this area. His name is Daniel Threet, and he is with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They've done a report, an exhaustive report, detailing this issue and talking about some potential solutions. So we're going to play the pre-recorded interview, and then I'll turn it over to my co-hosts, Pastor Brenda and Robin, to take your comments and conclude the show. So here we go with my interview with Daniel Threet. Today on the Call for Help show, we're honored to have as our guest Daniel Threet, who is a senior research analyst at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, which is a nonprofit that works on protecting low income workers and making sure that they have access to housing. Daniel, welcome to the Call for Help show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
The reason I wanted to talk to you, Daniel, is there was a story in the paper about a report that you were involved in creating called Out of Reach. And that talks about how, because of the rising rents, affordable housing is out of reach for a large segment of the low-income population. Can you just talk about the Out of Reach report, what went into it, and what your findings are specifically relating to Florida?
Yeah, certainly. Out of Reach is an annual publication from the National Low Income Housing Coalition that highlights the gulf between the wages that people actually earn and the price of decent rental housing in every state, metropolitan area, and county in the United States. And the central figure in the report is something we call the housing wage. It represents what a full-time worker would need to earn in order to be able to afford rent and utilities at fair market rent in their community. And we estimate that on average across the country, a full-time worker who's working full-time for 52 weeks a year needs to earn an hourly wage of about $20.40 an hour in order to be able to afford a modest one-bedroom apartment, or $24.90 for a two-bedroom apartment. And we know that there are many low-wage workers who earn far less than that. In fact, nowhere in America do full-time minimum wage workers earn the two-bedroom housing wage for their area. And in 93% of counties across the US, a full-time minimum wage job is insufficient to afford even a one-bedroom. Now in Florida, one needs to earn on average $20.17 an hour to afford a one bedroom, or $24.82 an hour to afford a modest two bedroom. Now, of course, at the minimum wage of $8.65, that isn't going to be sufficient. But in fact, the average renter in the state earns just $17.69 an hour. So this is a problem for many low-income renters throughout the state. Housing costs vary throughout the state. In Miami or Fort Lauderdale, you need to earn more than $29 an hour to be able to afford a two-bedroom. But it's not just the sticker shock of high rents that matter, but rather the gulf between wages and rents. So, for instance, in the Tampa metro area, one needs to earn $20 an hour to afford a modest one-bedroom, or $24.44 an hour to afford a two-bedroom. But the average renter in Tampa earns just $18.60 an hour. So this is a pretty pervasive problem.
That is, and your numbers are based on historical data and don't necessarily even take into account the recent increase in 2021 of rental rates. There was a story in the Tampa Bay Times where they had some data from CoStar Group that suggested that rents had gone up in the Tampa area by 21.7%. That was the largest increase that they had ever recorded. In the last 2 decades, the largest growth was in 2015 at 6.2%. So we're seeing a huge increase, and I think people are attributing it to a migration to Florida from people from, let's say, New Jersey or northern states where rents may be higher, coming to Florida because of at least the perception that the rents were lower and driving up the cost. But where does that leave the low income person who finds out that their rent has been increased beyond their means? What happens to them in that situation?
That's a set of really good questions. You're right that our report uses the fiscal year 2021 fair market rents, which do not reflect some of the changes that we've been seeing during the pandemic. And I've also seen some data that suggests that median rents in Tampa have been increasing considerably faster than rent increases across the rest of the country. In terms of the last question you asked about the practical consequences of this, I think that is super important here. When renters can't find affordable homes, one obvious consequence is that they are forced to rent homes that they cannot afford, that they become cost burdened, spending more than 30%, in some instances, even more than half of their income on rent. And that comes at the cost of other basic necessities. There's lots of research that shows that, especially for lower income renters, when they are forced into unaffordable housing, that means they have to cut back on necessities like food or medical care, transportation, education or enrichment opportunities for their children, which can have long-lasting ramifications for those households.
What does the report talk about racial inequities or how systematic racism impacts rental housing situation of low-income people?
That's a good question, and that is an issue that is extremely important. If we just focus on national averages without attending to differences in race and ethnicity, we will overlook who is most likely to be disadvantaged by this system. In one of our other annual reports, The Gap, which was published in March of this year, we pointed out that while 6% of white households are extremely low income renters, fully 20% of Black households are extremely low income renters. Renters of color are much more likely to be experiencing the brunt of this shortage of affordable housing. And out of reach, we also break down the wage and salary distribution by race and ethnicity to point out that while the median white worker can afford a one-bedroom in their area, the median Black worker and the median Latino worker cannot.
And that goes to wages. Can you talk about sort of the historical context of racism and housing and how that's impacted things?
Right. I do think this is a problem on at least two fronts. There's a problem on the wage end, and there's a problem in the housing markets generally. On the wage end, when we're looking at the distribution of wage by race or ethnicity, and we see that Black and Latino workers earn less, that is partly a function of discrimination in hiring. in discrimination in promotion, but it's also, I think, a function of broader inequality of opportunity for people over the course of their entire lives. Now, on the housing end, there are lots of reasons why we know that renters of color have experienced greater struggles because of decades of historical and ongoing discrimination in the housing. Obviously, in the 20th century, some of the federally subsidized programs that helped bring a lot of white households into the middle class were denied to households of color. And for that reason, among others, households of color are still more likely to be renters today.
Okay. And so those would be like opportunities to get first-time home loans or things like that to be able to purchase a home and have equity in a home and pass it on to your children. Okay. What do you and your organization see as the solutions to address this issue?
There are short-term problems and long-term problems. Right now, obviously, after a year and a half of the pandemic, there are lots of families that need immediate assistance. There are something like 6 million households or more who are renters who are currently not caught up on their rent, and with the end of eviction moratoria are facing dire consequences in the next few weeks or months. And for those households, we need emergency rental assistance to be directed to them as quickly as possible. There's a lot of money out there for emergency rental assistance right now. It's just not moving fast enough. Now, in the long term, addressing the structural problem that these low-income renters have faced for decades, we need a handful of policies. On the wage end, we need minimum wages that are higher and that move with inflation so they don't lose their value without constant changes. We also need labor policy that pushes wages up generally. But that on its own won't solve this issue, especially because there are over 5 million households in this country who are extremely low-income renters who are headed either by an elderly householder over age 62 or who have a householder with a disability. Not everybody can participate in the labor market to the same degree. We need expanded rental assistance. Right now, only 1 out of every 4 households who are eligible for federal rental assistance actually receives it. There are years-long wait for rental assistance across the country. We also just need to make a more significant and sustained investment in our affordable housing stock. The federal government hasn't really done that in decades, and we need significant investment in tools like the National Housing Trust Fund that can build and sustain housing that can be subsidized for the lowest income renters.
And if somebody wants to get involved or donate to your organization, what's the best way to get in touch with the coalition?
Oh, I'm happy you asked that. We are a membership organization made up of nonprofits, but also concerned individuals across the country who are all jointly committed to advancing public policy that would secure affordable, decent homes for the lowest income Americans. And if you're interested in learning more about our organization, you can visit our website at nlihc.org. That's for the National Low Income Housing Coalition.
Well, I was on the website today. There's a wealth of information. There are maps that you can click on in your area to find resources or to find data about wages and rents and things like that. So I just want to thank you for the work that your organization is doing. Thank you on a personal level for what you're doing in compiling these reports and advocating for assistance to low-income people. And thank you also for being on the show. We really enjoyed having you. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
We want to thank Paul for that interview with Mr. Daniel Threet. As everyone knows, that this show has been going on for, I think it's our 4th show. And everything has been surrounded thus far around housing, which is a great issue in our community. Which brings us to our next guest, Mr. Chris O'Donnell.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi. I had and I hope this doesn't go too fast because we have a lot to cover. But I read an article that you had written regarding the Tampa Police Department having a program or starting a program around apartments, crime, and the whole nasty debate over, what's right, what's wrong. Was it for the good of the community? Is it putting, making things worse for our community? So can you give me some background in just identify who you are and then give us some background in regards to the investigation?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. So my name's Chris O'Donnell. I'm a reporter with the Tampa Bay Times. Back in 2020, I actually picked up a project a colleague of mine who's since left the paper had begun back in 2018. We had found out that in 2013, Tampa Police kind of quietly launched this program where they would partner with landlords of apartment complexes. The program is called Crime-Free Multi-Housing. And in this program, they would encourage landlords to get their tenants to sign a lease addendum that puts them at risk of eviction for being involved with criminal activity, and who determines criminal activity seems to be up to the landlord. And then once they had signed up apartment complexes, Tampa police officers routinely sent them notices anytime a tenant was arrested or there was an encounter with a tenant. They did this even for arrests that happened, in other parts of the city. So we found out about this program. We had some concerns about how it was being used. It wasn't a citywide program. Tampa police officers, at least in the first few years of the program, they chose which apartment complexes they invited to enroll. So we did a public records request. We got copies of a database that police used to coordinate the program. We got copies of most of the letters that they sent to landlords. They couldn't provide them all. And we did an analysis of who was being impacted by this program. And we found that the 3/4 of the apartment complexes that police, had in this program were in minority neighborhoods. We used US Census data to look into that. And we found that 90% of the tenants that got flagged in this program were Black tenants. So on Wednesday, we published the results of our investigation, and it's made a lot of waves in the community. A number of civil rights groups have since actually sent a letter to Tampa Mayor Jane Castor, who was the chief of police when this program started, calling on her to end it and saying that it has a disparate, unfair impact on the Black community.
That's so when did the program start?
The program started in 2013, but it's kind of really picked up pace in the sort of next 2-3 years after that. And there was around, I said, 100 apartment complexes that were enrolled in the program, and the police sent hundreds of letters to landlords over the 8 years that the program's been running.
Do you know how many people have been evicted because of this?
We don't have an exact number, and I'll explain why. It's very difficult to determine. A lot of times, tenants get a notice to vacate posted on their door, and they don't fight an eviction. So they don't want to go to court, or they don't even know that they could fight an eviction. They just move out. We have some idea, though. We were able to get the police database that they use to monitor the program, and in that database, police actually updated records to show if a tenant had been evicted. That was the name of the field, was evicted. We don't know if that means, if they just put a yes down, even if it was a formal eviction, or if the tenant just moved on. But their records showed that 300 tenants were displaced, at least 300 tenants. We think the real number is higher. but there aren't records to show in every case.
So what do you think it's sad that when there's programs put out that would allegedly make our community safe, we always have to take a stop and listen or watch and take a bigger look at the bigger picture to see how it's really going to impact us, right? So what do you think the full intent of initially how this program was presented? Because I remember hearing about this program a couple of years ago, but I just kept moving because it didn't make sense to me at the time. Mm-hmm. And I assumed back then that it was targeting like grown people being in getting in trouble, not being on a lease, that type of thing. I was very surprised to read in your article where you have children that this is being reported on. And my second part of that question is, isn't there a privacy, like when kids get in trouble, aren't their records sealed? So if their records are sealed and they're protected, how is everyone else getting this information?
Right. And that's actually one of the things that made it tough for us to find out how many evictions had happened based on arrests. But yeah, landlords were sent records that detailed the arrest of juveniles with names. We have copies of those. So they were provided to us as well. In some cases, they did do redactions, but not in all cases. You asked me like the intent of the program, the scope of the program. I mean, it's hard for me. I can only tell you what the police told me. I don't want to put words in their mouth. They said the intent was to reduce crime in high crime apartment complexes. As I said, we actually did an analysis. There are 275 apartment complexes in the city of Tampa. Only 100 ended up being in the program. Participation in the program is voluntary. It's up to landlords, but police have acknowledged they definitely played a role in inviting landlords to join the program. So
this is, and Pastor Fruster, I'll give you an opportunity to ask a question if you have one. Yes, but my question is, so did they do robocalls to these, to every apartment complex? Did they send out letters to all of the apartment complexes to bring them in on this? How were these apartment complexes, how were they brought on board?
Right. I'm not aware that they did that, and they never told me that when I asked them, how did you select which complexes? They said that they wanted, they focused on complexes that had high rates of crime. That's what they told me. We know that they printed flyers for the program. I don't know how they were distributed, and the program's listed on their website. I will add that the number of complexes that are in the program has dwindled in the last sort of 2-3 years. There's now only 42 enrolled. And I also want to kind of let your viewers know that the Tampa Housing Authority was the biggest partner that TPD had was the Tampa Housing Authority. All of its properties are enrolled in the program and still are. And you're probably aware that the Housing Authority used to operate the one strike policy. Yeah. This kind of took over from that around about 2016.
So to get a clear, do you in regards to the one-step project, the one strike project, do you really understand what that is and how it works?
Yeah.
Could you explain it quickly for us?
So I think it was based on a Supreme Court ruling back in, and I'm not sure the actual year, but the Supreme Court ruled that tenants in public housing could be evicted, if they if a member of the household was arrested, or even a guest was arrested. I think it was related to a drug possession crime the ruling was on. But the Tampa Housing Authority operated that policy for years. So they have a one-strike committee, and when they learned of the arrest of tenants, they would review the case. They say they conduct their own investigation. They don't just rely on the police report. But in many, many cases, families were evicted based on the arrest of a tenant. They don't tend to wait for whether or not that arrest results in a conviction.
Pastor Fruster, do you have any questions?
I have a question, and my question may have already been answered, but I didn't really hear it. But good afternoon, Mr. Chris, and thank you for coming on with us today. And my question is, within those 100 complexes, do we know the percentage of race? In other words, do we know how many of those complexes were African American, Latino, Caucasian? Do we know that percentage? Because it just seems like only the African American communities get hit with things like this. And I'm just trying to hear, is there a balance with when this program went out with 100 complexes? Was there a balance? Because if it wasn't a balance, then clearly we can hear why African American and leaders, and not just all African Americans, but just leaders in our community is saying, why are you targeting our community like this? So that's why my question is, do you know the percentage of what race was involved in these 100 complexes?
Yeah, we do. We did an analysis. We plotted the whole city on a map. We actually did this in our online story. We plotted where every apartment complex was, and we looked at that neighborhood using US Census block data. We found that of the 100 complexes, 75, 3/4, were in neighborhoods where Black and Hispanic residents made up the majority of the population. So if you look at the city of Tampa, a large number of the complexes are in East Tampa, which historically has had a high population of Black residents. And that's the other thing about this program. We looked at how the program's being used in other cities around the US, and some of those cities have the same model as Tampa, but other cities adopted this program citywide, and it was implemented through an ordinance. So at least it applied to every community, and it was standard. That wasn't the case with Tampa.
Correct. It's targeted. And we're about to run out of time, and I do want to tag you again, Chris, for more information. But there's a bigger picture to this, right? That mom, that kid was giving her problems and did something wrong, right? Could have got evicted because of the child. But how many times does the mom go down and ask for help for that troubled kid, and they can't do anything for that troubled kid until he commits a felony?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's the anecdote that we led with was a teenager, 16 years old, who was arrested for breaking into cars and stealing change. He had $4.44 in his pocket and a flashlight and a few other things. So, his family ended up being evicted. Police informed. This arrest happened almost a mile away from where the apartment complex, but police informed the Tampa Housing Authority, and they decided that the family should be evicted. And we found there was a lot of juvenile arrests in the letters that we reviewed. And, obviously, eviction is a very blunt tool to use to try and as a tool to tackle, crime. And whole families ended up losing their home as a result.
Yeah, it's so we have to really look at this, not just what's right in front of us, but look at the bigger picture, right? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of parents are asking for help, and they can't get it until their kid commits a crime.
Yes.
And when that kid, when the parent is out there asking for help, that kid has, when they get caught, they've already done it. Yeah. Several times, probably. It's not the first time that they've done it. So we have to look at this, and this is systematically they're doing this, and our people are being displaced, and a lot of times need the help that's not there. Chris, we're out of time. I'm going to tag you again because I think that this is for us to really dive into this, for us to ask questions and get answers, right? Get answers, because we are being targeted. Our community is being targeted.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for appearing and just, joining us to provide us with this information.
Yeah, I'm glad
Yes.
to have the opportunity. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.